Good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful that y'all can join me once again. And yesterday we completed Genesis 31, where Laban and Jacob parted in peace. Now we're coming upon Genesis 32:1, and it begins, "And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him." That's a tremendous way to open a chapter. As Jacob just walking on the way, and the angels of God met him. We're not told much about this. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. This is spectacular, and I believe it's God's way of showing Jacob how now his eyes are opened to the spiritual side of life. Now will he lead a more spiritual life, because Laban was the worldly side of Jacob's life, and Laban and Jacob were much the same in many, many ways. And as we discussed in the last session, how Laban kind of showed Jacob who he was, who his old self was. And we're seeing now the new man coming along with Jacob, and God's starting to show him greater and greater things. I also believe that this is a way of showing Jacob the guardians that he has over him. We're always told about guardian angels, and we know that in the scripture it says, "And he shall give his angels charge over thee." Some time ago, in the 1800s, I believe, coming upon the early 1900s, there was a missionary named John Patton, and he was a missionary to the New Hebrides, hope I'm saying that right, islands, and his wife was with him. And one night, the natives of the island became very hostile to them, and word had gotten around how the natives were wanting to kill him and his wife. So, upon hearing the news, John actually began to pray. He and his wife began to pray all through the night, knowing that they were coming that night. They could even, I suppose, hear them in the distance, and so it's how close that they were. And it was just certain death for them. There was no doubt certain death. But as they prayed through the night, they noticed that they never did attack. And in the morning, they were all gone. About a year later, the chief of that tribe, he converted to Christianity. John began to ask him about that night, what happened. The chief then commented, "Who were all those men you had with you there?" The missionary explained only he and his wife were there. The chief insisted he had seen hundreds of big men with shining garments and swords circling the mission headquarters, so the natives were afraid to attack. They were too afraid to attack. This was obviously angels. They seen no need in showing themselves to John or his wife. They were just protecting them. They were inquiring as to whether God would protect them or not. They were asking God to protect them, and this is what the enemy's saying. There's so many times that enemies will be shown more than we are, simply because we're part of the test. We're the ones going through the test, and they're the ones that it's okay to terrify them. This would have been a terrifying sight, no doubt, to John and his wife. But this also shows kind of what Jacob went through. "And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom." All of this was taking place right about 40 miles from Jerusalem. As you can see, Beersheba right down here, Hebron right here, Jerusalem, and this area right in here near the Jabbok River and Peniel is where all of this is taking place. "And Jacob commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau, thy servant Jacob, saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks, and men servants, and women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord, that I may find grace in thy sight. Notice how he's introducing himself once again to his brother after 20 years, reintroduced. But notice how he's addressing him. He says, thy servant Jacob, my Lord. He's humbling himself. I really like what Charles Spurgeon said about this. Jacob had just been delivered from Laban, but he was oppressed by another load. The dread of Esau was upon him. He had wronged his brother, and you cannot do a wrong without being haunted by it afterwards. So no doubt Jacob was feeling bad, and he knew that Esau was probably a far greater threat to him than Laban, and he was in the right with Laban, whereas he knew that he had greatly offended Esau in many justifiable ways. Even though God's ultimate will was done, his brother was still offended by him. And anytime that you're in any kind of guilt, it's much more difficult to conjure up the courage to stand your ground. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. There's a small army coming with him. So obviously Jacob's going to be threatened by this. The last time that we had seen of Esau, that we knew anything of Esau, was 20 years before this. And Esau had vowed to himself that he was going to kill Jacob. And word got around even to Rebekah, to the whole camp, especially to Jacob, how Esau was comforted by the thought of killing Jacob, that it was a savory taste of revenge that he just couldn't wait to partake in. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels, into two bands. Bands is basically two camps of travelers. Instead of being one big camp, he divided them, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. He's saying, one I'm going to put before me. If Esau kills them, then the rest of us will escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord, which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. He's saying, I'm already having to separate due to my anxiety over this. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. Notice this is his request. We're about to come up on this. He says, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother. That's his request. And thou sayest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. He's saying, God, you told me that you would keep me alive. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. And that means that his possessions he was going to give to his brother. 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. So he's sending three out, three different camps, and he's separating them. And he says, okay, one go before the other, and then the next come, and then the next come, and just keep presenting him with all these gifts. So this is a planning ahead process for Jacob. He's saying, okay, I'm just going to lavish gifts after gifts after gifts upon him. And then maybe by the time he gets to the first camp, he'll show mercy, and then I can come out of hiding. So he's given a lot of cushion for he and his family. And he commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau, my brother, meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou? And whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the droves, saying, On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, he's saying, and say this also, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept of me. He says, maybe he'll let me live. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night, and took his 2 wives, and his 2 women servants, and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them, and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. So he's sending everybody on over the brook. Everybody's passing over, but Jacob stays behind. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. The reading of this in our vernacular today would be, and a man wrestled with Jacob. Jacob did not wrestle the man, even though he did, but it was the man wrestling with Jacob. Now, who is this man? I think that it's pretty obvious, and we'll come to that just right here in a second. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And when the man saw that he prevailed not against him, Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Now mind you, they have been wrestling all night long. That's very important. Keep that in mind. And he said unto him, the man asked Jacob, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. It's a big verse right there. Okay? This is just an amazing event that happened. Now, not only was that the very first mention of Israel in the whole Bible, but the name Israel actually means he will rule with God. So it's a very powerful name, very promising. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him, this man, and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? He's saying, You know my name. And Jacob is about to reveal who this is. And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. In the very next verse, we're told about who this man is. He says, I have seen God face to face. And we know that Jesus Christ is the only one of God on earth in the flesh. For God was manifest in the flesh and walked among us. But Peniel actually means face of God. You couldn't get any more obvious as to who this man was that wrestled with him, and this was Christ. Christ appeared unto Abraham, but he appeared much more peaceful to Abraham. And he appeared with 2 angels, and now we're seeing him appearing unto Jacob, and it's not so peaceful. They're wrestling, and they wrestle all night. This shows Jacob's determination. Now, why is Jacob wrestling with him all night? What's the point of them wrestling? Well, Jacob, he tells him, he says, Let me go. This is what Christ says to Jacob. And Jacob says, I'll not let thee go until you bless me. Now remember what his prayer was right before this. What was his prayer? He said, Deliver me from my brother Esau. And he says, You promised to multiply my seed and such. He says, You promised all these things, keep us all alive. He says, because now I'm facing certain death. In order to test this, we go through this type of wrestling with God as well, just not in such a blatant form. This was God letting it play out in the physical world. Just how much was Jacob willing to give in order to receive that blessing? How much of himself was he willing to give? And they wrestled all night. I have mentioned this before. Whenever I would train for fighting, it was just it's such a draining experience. Watch any MMA fight, and you'll see they're drained after like 20 minutes of that, rolling on the ground, wrestling type, jujitsu and whatnot. They're just drained. But Jacob, even in his old age, like this was an older man, and he was wrestling all night long, because he so much wanted this blessing. He was willing to give every bit of himself for God to bless him. But now Jacob would forever bear the mark of this blessing upon him, and that he would be halted, or he would walk with a stumble. And as he passed over Peniel, which is Peniel, it's the same thing, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh, meaning he couldn't use his thigh because Christ had touched it. And the chapter ends like this: Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew, which is the tendon, which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh. That's what happened within his thigh. His leg is one of the tendons shrank, and he cut that, very, very painful. His heart had to have been very painful, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day. Okay, so the Jews, and they still do this. The Jews still do this. They do not partake of the sinew upon any thigh of any cow or anything that they eat, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. As one can read right here, the Jews are they keep this very superstitiously. Do they abstain from it unto this day? They have a whole chapter in one of their treaties in the Mishnah, to which this is the Mishnah, a document that describes a life of sanctification in which the rituals of the temple are adapted for communal participation. The Mishnah giving rules concerning it, not partaking of this sinew in the hollow of the thigh and such, where it is forbidden to eat of it, whether in the land of Israel or out of it, whether in common food or sacrifices, even in burnt offerings, it was to be taken out, and whether in cattle of the house or of the field, and both in the right and left thigh, but not in fowls, because they have no hollow, and butchers are not to be trusted, and whoever eats of it to the quantity of an olive is to be beaten with 40 stripes. But yes, that does conclude our study for today. It has not been a very long one, but now we can at least try to think a little bit more on what was the purpose of Jesus wrestling with Jacob back then. And it's a fascinating event. And first mention of Israel. And next up, we're coming to Jacob's meeting with Esau. God of peace be with you all. Thank you.